Good morning, everyone. Buenos días todos. Estamos esperando un momento para que toda la gente que está en el cuarto de espera entre a la conferencia. We're waiting for a moment until everyone who's in the waiting room enters the conference. Okay. So the first thing to say is that there is simultaneous translation in this conference. You should see a button at the bottom of your Zoom screen that says interpretation. Lo primero que les quiero informar es que hay traducción en esta conferencia y va a haber traducción todo el día. Si miren en la parte de abajo de la ventana de Zoom, van a ver algo que dice interpretación. Y también si miran en el chat, hay un mensaje de las personas que están haciendo la interpretación hoy día con instrucciones. If you look in the chat, you will see that there are instructions from the interpreter about how the interpretation will be working. Namely, if everyone, the panelists will do their best to speak slowly, and participants, when you have questions and are called upon, if you can speak slowly as well. Participantes también, por favor, si pueden hablar un poco despacio. Y creo que en este momento ya la interpretación está funcionando, entonces vamos a hablar solo en un idioma. So I think at this point, hopefully the interpretation is working and we can all begin to speak in whatever language we choose between English and Spanish. Okay? All right. Well, welcome everybody. Buenos días. On behalf of the University of Chicago Law School and the Posen Center for Human Rights, I want to welcome you. Bienvenidas to our gathering on making gender equality a reality, women's rights and constitutional change in the Americas. I am Claudia Flores, one of the conference organizers. I'm a professor here at the University of Chicago, and I am also the director of the Global Human Rights Clinic. It's really a pleasure to welcome all of you and open this conference on this very important conversation. I want to thank the panelists for dedicating their time and sharing their experiences with us today, the law school and the Posen Center for making this conference possible, and the audience for spending some or hopefully all of your day with us. And I will pause for a moment also to say that this event is being live streamed on Facebook. If you look at the chat, you will see the link. So please circulate it to anyone who was not able to register or did not register. They can watch the conference as a webinar. We convened this conference to give us all an opportunity to share experiences and increase our understanding. In this region, the Americas, we share a human rights system, the Organization of American States, that has developed some very progressive jurisprudence on women's rights and states' obligations around women's rights. We work and we live in our neighboring states. Many people migrate back and forth through the region. In many states, we share a common language and overlapping cultures. In this region, in the last decade, women have made significant advancements in the Americas in areas of political leadership, economic autonomy, and reproductive freedom. But women in our region face many challenges as well. Countries in the Americas have one of the highest rates of femicide, violence against women. Reproductive rights are still highly restricted, and accounts of sexual harassment in the workplace abound here in the United States and elsewhere. Women of color, women from historically marginalized communities continue to bear the brunt of socioeconomic inequalities overall. The impact of gender stereotypes remains a burden for the girls in the America for their potential, and it's likely to do so for years to come. Still, there has been a lot to celebrate. And chief among these positive developments have been the changes in many of our country's constitutions. Constitutions today are far more responsive, protective, and engaged on women's rights. And as the University of Chicago students will share with you in a moment, there have been many advancements that are key to women's equality. This is in part due to CEDAW, which is our International Convention on Women's Rights, that we've seen so many changes in constitutions. And this is a critical advancement. Constitutions are the cornerstone of any legal system. They're an expression of its values, the rights of its people, state commitment, and a vision of society. Women's equality captured in a constitution is a very important thing. But the question remains, how important? And is that commitment translated as an actual improvement in women's lives? This is the question we're going to ask today in sharing with each other our experiences. What exactly constitutional change has meant for women? What could it mean for women? What foundation is necessary for this changes to really be meaningful? Some scholars who have researched this have concluded that constitutions have not helped women nearly as much as we think they should have. The thought is that the changes in constitutions are not taken seriously by our governments or sufficiently seriously, or that the inequalities are so embedded in our society that it's difficult to remedy them in a constitutional manner. So today we want to ask that question. Are constitutions the best way to address women's rights in our countries? Do these protections really protect all of women, given our many intersectional identities? What needs to take place in our society, our communities, and our political processes for constitutions to really, really matter to us? The speakers today and the audience represent many different countries in the Americas. In fact, let's take a quick moment to recognize the people here. If folks could just put their names and their countries in the chat, let's see where everyone is from. The panelists and the participants, put your names and your countries in the chat so we can see who we're speaking to and how our region is represented. All right. We face different challenges, and there are commonalities in the inequality experienced by women. Sometimes these commonalities are awe-inspiring. There is a global consistency to the way women are denied access, resources, autonomy, and opportunity. And for the women in the Americas, I hope that today we can illuminate some of those for each other and have a better view and understanding of a way forward. Okay, and with that, I open this conference. I'm going to call on Mariana Olaizola and bring her to our virtual Zoom stage. She is a faculty fellow and lecturer in the Global Human Rights Clinic, and she's going to introduce our student presenters who are going to provide a context and overview for constitutional change in the Americas that I hope will set the stage for our discussion. This will then be followed by our keynote speech from Ambassador Julissa Reynoso. All right, Mariana.
Muchísimas gracias, Claudia, y buenos días a todas y a todos. Yo soy Mariana Olaizola, soy becaria en la Universidad de Chicago y abogada en la Clínica de Derechos Humanos Globales. Es un placer estar con ustedes y es un placer también introducir al equipo de estudiantes, Nicole, Javiera y Christy, quienes jugaron un papel esencial en la organización de esta conferencia, y quienes en unos momentos harán una presentación de apertura. Ahora déjenme introducirlas brevemente en inglés. Nicole Briones is a second-year law student, a Doctor of Business Leadership candidate, and a member of the Global Human Rights Clinic at the University of Chicago. Nicole's leadership and pro bono experience focuses on equitable accessibility and opportunity for those with disabilities, women and minority empowerment, and domestic violence protection. This summer, Nicole will be a fellow at Kirkland & Ellis in New York City. Javiera Aviles has a law degree from the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile and has worked as a lawyer in Chile for more than 7 years. She is currently an LLM student at the University of Chicago and a student at the Global Human Rights Clinic. And last, but certainly not least, Christy Krause is a third-year law student at the University of Chicago, specializing in international human rights. She has worked at the law school's Global Human Rights Clinic for 2 years. Her research has focused on the rights of women and immigrants. She has interned at the Center for Human Rights and Global Justice, the Constitutional Court of Colombia, and the ACLU Immigrants' Rights Project. After graduation, she will begin her career as a Global North Fellow at the human rights organization De Justicia in Bogotá on their anti-discrimination team. And with that, Nicole, the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, Mariana, for the introduction. Hello, everyone, and thank you again for joining us today. My name is Nicole Briones, and our team today wanted to open up this conference with the question of how are countries who are undertaking constitutional reform processes reacting to the pressing need for women's substantive equality. So to answer this, let's first take a step back to see what the world's constitutions today are reflecting. Reassuringly, almost 99% of the world's countries have non-discrimination and equality provisions. 25 countries in the world now have gender quotas for political representation, demonstrating the prioritized value of having women voices in political government. 24 of the world's constitutions today have independent women's rights guarantees. These provisions mirror a country's commitment to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which states that a country will take affirmative measures to ensuring women's equality. We see provisions from these in the Americas, in Cuba, and Colombia. With 1 in 3 women being victims of violence, we see almost 95% of the world's constitutions today granting protections against violence. And lastly, we see new advancements in the ways that women's rights are being protected. Starting in 2015, we are now seeing gender equality machinery. Gender equality machinery specifically can take many forms. For example, in gender councils that are being formed to actively protect and resolve gender issues. In the Americas, we see this in Ghana. Now let's take a closer look at the Americas. We see 100% of the countries having non-discrimination and equality provisions, 100% having protections from violence. Again, both of these areas disparately impact women, and states are obligating their right to protect women. Supporting this substantive equality advancement, we see 62% of the countries with broad affirmation action provisions, which means the state will take additional investments and measures for women. Finally, we see 50% of the countries in the Americas with a constitutional or legal provision on political parity. This tends to take the form of gender quotas. This is just encouraging and supporting women's involvement in the political process. Now, let's shift to a modern day constitutional study that this clinic performed, which delves a little closer into the types of trends we are seeing today. What we are looking at here is 36 countries who undertook constitutional reform processes from 2003 to 2013. What this graph reflects is there is a significant positive change across the countries examined. Taking a closer look, we find the countries with the most positive change are in the Americas. Ecuador's 2008 constitution had almost 40 provisions added related to women's rights, trailed by Bolivia and the Dominican Republic. Now, within those changes, we looked at what specific areas were substantive equality being produced for women. So this graph, what it shows is the subject matter a country added to their constitution. The largest area of incorporation was a human rights commission or a supervising board that reviews grievances of its citizens who have had their rights violated. 22 countries have added this provision. This is followed by participation in government and then a three-way tie between adding employment, health, and affirmative measures. Now, let's take a look at what areas countries improve their language on. 21 countries improved their non-discrimination guarantee from their previous constitution to their newly ratified constitution. 19 added gender-neutral equality provisions, and 14 added a right to health. Overall, we are seeing almost a universal adoption of equality and non-discrimination provisions. We see new emerging areas of focus to achieve substantive equality, and few backsliding provisions that hurt women in new constitutions. Now let's take a look at some of the actual language that's being ratified. Here we have Haiti's constitution from 2012. which provided a quota that at least 30% of the candidates at all levels of the national government must be female. At the local level, this has been effectively abided and implemented, which has corresponded into more women mayors across the country, an unprecedented amount of women leadership. However, implementation has not been entirely successful. At the national level, it has largely been disregarded. This has been attributed to the public disapproval of the quota. This begins to show the tension of passing constitutional rights and the actual absorption of those rights into society. Now in Brazil, we see a mandatory maternity leave to close the gender gap. At childbirth is one of the key stages where women are often forced to exit the workforce. Brazil has effectively implemented this, as it has laws that are punishable by jail if violated, and also employers can be fined large amounts of money. Now, I'll be turning it over to Javiera, who will go into more detail about other real-life constitutional examples. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. The next portion of this presentation will be in Spanish. As a reminder, English and Spanish translations are available within the Zoom app. Mi nombre es Jaira Vilés y el siguiente caso que veremos se refiere a la violencia contra la mujer, específicamente la Constitución de Bolivia. En esta Constitución se estableció que el Estado debe adoptar las medidas necesarias para prevenir, eliminar y sancionar la violencia contra la mujer. Posteriormente, en el 2013, se dictó la ley para garantizar a las mujeres una vida libre de violencia. Ahora bien, la violencia contra la mujer sigue teniendo números preocupantes y actualmente se está implementando un programa de fortalecimiento de la prevención, atención y sanción de la violencia contra la mujer. Next slide, please. También podemos ver el caso de Ecuador y su Constitución de 2008, que en materia de salud de la mujer estableció la obligación del Estado de garantizar a las mujeres embarazadas y en periodo de lactancia la no discriminación y asimismo la gratuidad de los servicios de salud materna. Si bien la aplicación de esta garantía continúa siendo materia de discusión a nivel nacional, sí podemos ver cómo en el 2020 la Corte Constitucional de Ecuador emitió una sentencia favorable para mujeres que estaban en etapa de embarazo o de periodo de lactancia y que estaban trabajando en el sector público de manera temporal y habían sido notificadas del término de su relación laboral. La Corte, al momento de fallar a favor de estas mujeres, consideró expresamente el artículo 43 de la Constitución que garantizaba la no discriminación. Next slide, please. Ahora, además de ver lo que ya ha pasado, lo que ya se ha logrado en materia de género en las constituciones, podemos pensar qué es lo que viene. Y un proceso interesante de revisar es el nuevo proceso constituyente chileno. Luego de movimientos sociales que iniciaron en octubre de 2019, el Congreso chileno aprobó la modificación de la actual Constitución para incorporar un proceso de redacción y aprobación de una nueva Constitución. El año pasado, el 25 de octubre, mediante un plebiscito, Chile aprobó la redacción de una nueva Constitución. Y mañana y pasado mañana, el 15 y 16 de mayo, Chile elegirá a los miembros de la Convención Constitucional que redactarán la nueva Constitución. En materia de género, lo interesante de este proceso es que, novedosamente, se incorporaron reglas de paridad en el proceso constituyente, tanto para la conformación de las listas de pactos electorales como para la elección efectiva de los miembros de la convención. Sin embargo, esta paridad se aplica a nivel de distritos y no todos los distritos tienen un número par de miembros, por lo que debemos esperar al resultado de las elecciones para conocer cómo se aplicará de forma efectiva esta paridad. Asimismo, el proceso constituyente de Chile viene aparejado con una serie de expectativas de toda la población en varias materias, por lo que las mujeres enfrentarán el reto de incorporar en la agenda constituyente materias de género. Next slide, please. El proceso chileno también nos puede llevar a preguntarnos exactamente qué es lo que puede hacer una constitución para la ciudadanía o para las mujeres en particular. Next slide, please. En este sentido, tenemos que saber que las constituciones tienen varios ámbitos de aplicación. Por un lado, en el ámbito legal, establecen derechos y garantías de las personas. En el ámbito político, definen la distribución de poderes y el rol de ciertas instituciones dentro de un país. Y en el ámbito social, fijan los ideales comunes, las aspiraciones y la identidad cultural común de un país. Una vez establecidos estos ámbitos, es necesario implementarlos. Next slide, please. En este sentido, la implementación es un proceso complejo. No hay un camino único de implementación. En algunos casos, las opiniones judiciales son la forma más importante de aplicación de las normas constitucionales, pero también hay otros. La ley también puede ser una forma de especificar o detallar una norma constitucional. Y asimismo, también podemos ver cómo las normas constitucionales pueden impactar en las prácticas locales y en la opinión pública. Finalmente, también pueden implementarse por la vía de ayudar o guiar la toma de decisiones presupuestarias en un país. Ahora los dejaré con Christy, que continuará esta presentación. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Javiera. Now, I will be talking more about current advances in women's rights that we've seen and trends in constitutions and legislation that seem really exciting for the women's rights movement. Next slide, please. The first one of those advances and trends is the evolution of the role of law in areas that previously were off limits to constitutions and legal reforms because they were particular to family life or just in the private sphere. So for family life, marriage and parentage can particularly affect a woman's ability to dictate how she lives her life and can be helpful to have protections in these areas. Violence against women was once viewed as a very private matter, especially domestic violence and sexual harassment that the law just did not reach. Yet, obviously, this is a societal problem that's affecting women, and having legal reforms in those areas can really help tremendously. One example of this is Brazil's Article 226, which says that the state shall assure assistance to the family and shall create mechanisms to suppress violence within the family. Another area, women's work in the home, is particularly helpful to have recognized as work. This is something relatively new in constitutions, and we've seen in Ecuador, Article 325, the state, in guaranteeing the right to work, also recognizes women as productive social players and includes the work of caregiving for people in that definition of work. Next slide, please. Another exciting area that we've seen, and especially constitutional reforms, are affirmative measures. Nicole mentioned this before, but the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, backs this type of constitutional measure, which really asks for positive steps that public authorities can take to achieve substantive gender equality. So really trying to look at the equality gap and see what are ways that the state can step in to really help close that gap. Argentina's Article 75 is a good example of this. In this provision, they say Congress is empowered to legislate and promote positive measures guaranteeing true equal opportunities in treatment. So really putting the onus on public authorities to figure out ways to close this gap. Gender equality machinery, like Nicole mentioned previously, can also help with this and is something new we're seeing, including councils and committees really committed to pushing substantive gender equality in countries. Next slide, please. Another trend that we're seeing that has both positives and negatives is more specificity in constitutions and legislative reform, more details being added in provisions and much more specific provisions that relate to women's rights. This can be a positive in that when you're in court, you can point to specific language that actually includes women's rights to very specific things. At the same time, though, it can also be negative in terms of having a very lengthy constitution that perhaps is difficult to interpret or confusing or just hard to implement. So this is a trend we're seeing so far. It hasn't been fully evaluated in terms of its effect, but we can see definitely positives out of having more details included and definitely more women's rights included in constitutions. Next slide. And finally, women's voices. Women's voices and representation are such an important part of the social conversations happening today. And once excluded, communities are now being represented much more formally in political bodies, such as the Constitutional Assembly in Chile that Javiera presented about. Gender parity for the first time will be in effect in that assembly. Haiti's political quota provision is another example of this, with 30% requirement for female inclusion. And remembering that these voices matter because women do have influence. They are forming coalitions across countries, collaborating with other women who are involved in policy advocacy across the region and the world, and pushing new priorities as we're seeing these new inclusion of very new rights and new realms that were previously left out are now being included because of this. But there are still a lot of problems, and really inclusion and participation is not at the levels we would want to see. And these challenges persist because of history, and really the real impact of all of what we've been discussing is hard to assess at this point in how these provisions are affecting women's lives. So achieving substantive women's equality is imperative for the well-being and progress of societies worldwide. And we're really excited to learn today from all of the panelists about their perspectives for how we can push this goal forward and really succeed in our efforts. So thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you, students. We hope this has given us a good foundation to have this day-long discussion on constitutions and gender equality. Now, I have the very exciting pleasure of introducing our keynote, but I do want to make sure that Ambassador Reynoso is here. Are you with us already? I have many, many windows on my screen. Okay, we might have, oh, she is? Okay, great. All right, wonderful. Okay, so it is a great pleasure and honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Ambassador Julissa Reynoso. She is Assistant to the President and Chief of Staff for Dr. Jill Biden, the First Lady of the United States of America. In her role, she also serves as the co-chair of the White House Gender Policy Council. Before being appointed to the Biden-Harris administration, Ambassador Reynoso was a litigation partner at the law firm of Winston and Strawn. She also was on the faculty of Columbia Law School and Columbia School of International and Public Affairs. Ambassador Reynoso served as trustee for New York Presbyterian Hospital and for Columbia University, and was on the board of directors of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under the Law and the Truman National Security Project. During the Obama-Biden administration, Ambassador Reynoso served as U.S. Ambassador to Uruguay and as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for the Western Hemisphere in the U.S. Department of State. Ambassador Reynoso clerked for Judge Laura Taylor Swain of the Southern District of New York and is a graduate of Harvard University, the University of Cambridge, and Columbia Law School. And last but not least, Ambassador Reynoso grew up in the Bronx, New York City. So with that, I am going to introduce our keynote speaker. Ambassador Reynoso, you have the Zoom stage. And I'm not sure if you're speaking, but you are muted, or at least I can't hear you. Is that true for everyone? Can no one out? No one can hear her? Is that right? No.
No, we cannot.
Michael?
Hi, everyone.
Wonderful. We can hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. We cannot see you, but we can hear you.
Okay, terrific. And apologies. Can you hear me and see me now? I had a hard time getting on.
I cannot see you, but I can hear you. Although maybe
Can you
you're.
hear me?
Can you hear me, Ambassador? This is Claudia.
Interesting. I can hear you, Claudia, but can you? My camera's on, so you should be able to see me. You can't see.
We cannot
can't
see you.
me?
No, no.
Interesting. Huh.
Oh, there you are.
Not sure
see
what
you.
to do.
See you and hear you.
Okay. Okay, terrific. Well, I'm sorry for the technical difficulties. I want to greet everyone and thank Claudia and the rest of the team from the University of Chicago for having me be part of this session. Can you hear me well? Is this working?
Yes, we can see you and hear you. Yes.
Perfectly. Okay. So good morning and thank you for the invitation to speak today. Again, my name is Julissa Reynoso. I'm one of the two co-chairs of the White House Gender Policy Council. And I also, along with Jen Klein, who's a terrific partner in this endeavor. And I'm also the chief of staff to Dr. Jill Biden, who's the First Lady of the United States. I'm excited to be with you here today, encouraged by the vibrant and timely discussions on the agenda. We are at a critical inflection point, as all of you know, in order to recover from the devastation of the COVID-19 pandemic. We know we must take a whole of government approach to advance women's rights, gender equity, and gender equality. As countries map their recovery and their efforts from the pandemic, women must have seats at the table. And that's why, one of the many reasons why the White House established the Gender Policy Council, and President Biden, through an executive order signed on International Women's Day, the order establishing the Gender Policy Council, which represents one of the most significant elevations of gender equality within the United States government and the US administration to date. The council is spearheading a whole of government effort focused on advancing the rights of women and girls at home in the United States and abroad. The Gender Policy Council counts amongst its members representatives from all the different agencies of the US government, including the Department of State, the Treasury Department, the Justice Department, USAID, among the many others. We have over 40 different agencies and institutions that are formally part of the US federal government that are part of the council. Crucially, the president has ensured that the council reports directly to him in our efforts to advance, and his efforts to advance gender equality and equity. As part of the executive order establishing the council, we are tasked with developing a government-wide gender strategy plan, a first of its kind for the US government, which we hope to be able to finalize this fall. The council works not only on domestic policy priorities, but also in the foreign policy sphere. To that end, the Biden-Harris administration is committed to increasing women's political participation across the globe. We know that women's political participation and legal protection strengthen democracies, grow economies, stabilize communities, and create lasting peace. Women often take on leadership roles in post-conflict community-led transformation and recovery efforts. But despite this vital leadership, women are too often excluded from spaces where decisions are being made about their own communities and about their futures and the future of their families. Promoting women's meaningful inclusion is also a strategic imperative for the United States as it improves economic and security concerns. And now more than ever, women's participation is essential across not only the United States, but throughout the world. And for our purposes here, obviously the Americas, which is a part of the world that I know personally very well. We should take a moment to look at the many success stories in the region. 7 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean have legislative bodies with at least 40% where 40% are women. There are also many women serving at senior levels of government, encouraging and promoting the leadership gains that have already been made, and key part of advancing women's political participation. Yet, despite these advances, public life remains in certain parts of the Americas, like certain parts here in the United States, treacherous for women. Gender-based violence, in particular, is a human rights issue and a driver of migration across the region. Gender-based violence is also a barrier to women's political participation, as women in positions of leadership regularly face harassment and death threats. As we work to increase political participation, we need to think beyond merely getting on the ballot, which we know can be a challenge in and of itself. If a woman is listed on a ballot to fill a party's requirements or their agenda, but women are always listed at the bottom, we can't consider that equal access to political participation. And if she's afraid to run for office, for fear of being killed, or for having no one care for her family, that can't be considered equal access either. In the world of media, if a woman journalist is threatened, harassed, if her female colleagues are killed for doing their job, that too severely impacts women's access to political participation. We need to make sure women are listed on the ballot in ways that give them a chance to actually be elected, and that they are safe as candidates, as elected people and appointed officials, as leaders in civil society and private sector, and as private citizens. I am in awe of women across the region who are fighting both from within and outside government institutions for much needed change. In her remarks at the opening of the UN Commission on the Status of Women, Vice President Harris said, quote, "The status of democracy also depends fundamentally on the empowerment of women, not only because the exclusion of women in decision-making is a marker of a flawed democracy, but because the participation of women strengthens democracy." That's her message. It's worth taking a moment to think about that full and equal participation, presence, and efforts of women are fundamental to establishing, growing, and strengthening our democracies. They need to be at the table. The Biden-Harris administration is wholly committed to increasing women's political participation here at home in the US and Latin America and across the globe. And that is part of the agenda of the Gender Policy Council that I lead with my colleague, Jen Klein. We need to also recognize the disparate impact of the pandemic on women and girls. The need for this kind of strong and stable leadership is clearer than ever today. COVID-19 has shone a light on the existing the women and girls face around the world. The data already shows that the pandemic's impact has hit women and girls disproportionately hard. And these negative impacts are compounded for women who are also members of historically marginalized groups. It has disproportionately impacted women's employment and health and increased rates of gender-based violence to such an extent that GBV is being referred to as, quote, the shadow pandemic. Throughout the world, economic insecurity, combined with lockdowns, mobility restrictions, and other public health measures, have also contributed massively to the rates of domestic violence, disrupted access to sexual and reproductive health services, and contributed to girls' loss of access to education. In particular, LGBTQI people have faced increasingly dangerous situations. Domestic and family violence is one of the most prevalent forms of violence that LGBTQI people experience, and the threat is amplified as people lose jobs and are forced to return home to environments which may not be supportive at all. Survivors of gender-based violence have faced challenges in accessing basic health, psychosocial support, and other services during the pandemic. In many cases, they are trapped at home with their abusers, even as they take on increased caregiving responsibilities and face uncertain economic futures. We also know that access to sexual and reproductive health services is essential health care, and that the pandemic has caused large disruptions in these services as well. And to be clear, increasing access to reproductive health care, addressing health disparities, and promoting sexual and reproductive health and rights are all matters of gender equality. Before the pandemic even began, more than 200 million people in low and middle income countries had an unmet need for modern contraception. We know that this has a serious impact on maternal, reproductive, and infant health. And again, this was pre-pandemic. You can imagine where we are now. In previous public health emergencies, we saw the serious impacts that overburdened healthcare systems and disruptions in care had on women's and girls' access to sexual and reproductive health services. And it's been no different this time. According to data newly released by the UNFPA, an estimated 12 million women experienced disrupted access to family planning services, with 1.4 million unintended pregnancies as a result. The US sees access to sexual and reproductive health services as a critical area that we must address, and we are to build back better for everyone. Building back better also means increasing women's economic security and opportunity by addressing the structural barriers to labor force participation and by decreasing wage and wealth gaps. Here in the United States, women make up over 60% of our essential workers, serving in frontline jobs and taking on greater health risks to keep our vital services, the vital services in our communities that our communities need. Women of color in particular are disproportionately represented in frontline jobs and comprise more than half of the workers in critical service fields, such as housekeeping and nursing. During this pandemic, millions of women have suffered and endured greater health risks in the workplace and at home. Work to advance women's economic security must include addressing these caregiving needs, which have grown substantially during the pandemic. Women provide the majority of care work to their families, loved ones, and communities. This work has both increased and grown more difficult because of the pandemic. The caregiving crisis laid bare by the COVID-19 pandemic demonstrates plainly just how vital care work is. There is no paid formal economy without the often unpaid, sometimes informal, and many times unseen care of women. Care work makes all other productivity possible. It holds together the foundation of our economies, and it is integral to the administrations, President Biden's administrations, commitment to building back the country better. Since taking office, President Biden has taken big and bold steps to set up on this path. And I'm just going to go through some examples of this. In March, he announced the American Jobs Plan, which calls on Congress to invest in our country's infrastructure, including our care infrastructure and our care workers who have been overlooked, underpaid, and undervalued. In April, he rolled out the American Families Plan, which invests $1.8 trillion in our economic future, helping families cover the cost of childcare and other essential expenses, lowering health insurance premiums, cutting child poverty, and creating a national comprehensive paid family and medical leave program. Both these plans are once-in-a-generation investments to rebuild the economy, and more importantly, and essential to rebuild the economy, support the families that make up our economies and our basic and our the structures of our communities. And they would be transformative for the care economy and the way we approach care work broadly. This kind of change is desperately needed, as we all know that nearly 5 million paid home care workers and nursing assistants in the US provide essential support every day to people, from folks who have disabilities to the elderly. This has been clear during the COVID-19 crisis. And I have to say, this has been primarily impacting women of color. The median wage for home care workers, for over half of whom are women of color, is just over $12 an hour, meaning that 1 in 4 home care workers lives below the poverty line, even though they are providing basic, essential, all necessary support to people and communities. Many also lack basic access to health coverage and paid sick leave. By investing in the care work as a type of infrastructure in the post-pandemic economy, President Biden has elevated this vital labor, and the women primarily women who carried it out. By asking what our social and economic future could and should look like, pandemic recovery investments can also serve as accelerators. It's a moment to test our values, to ask what we will work toward and what we will leave behind now that COVID-19 has starkly revealed the inequities that many of us, frankly, already knew. The White House is committed to a vision of recovery that tackles all these issues and the underlying disparities impacting them. While Congress considers the president's job and family plans, efforts to implement the American Rescue Plan, which was passed, are in full swing. The ARP, as we call it, meets the moment by providing immediate relief for millions of Americans with direct payments into the hands of hardworking families. It also extends unemployment insurance benefits and eligibility, increased the child tax credit and earned income tax credit, expanded child care assistance, and provided essential support to survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. An equitable recovery is essential. COVID-19 swiftly wiped out gains in labor force participation, gains that were painstakingly won over decades of hard-fought work by women. Gender policies have been long in coming, but we finally have, we believe, gender policies that are smart, also smart investments, including ensuring equality for women and girls and the LGBTQI community. These policies are not just smart because they address the needs of families and touch women in particular, but they reduce poverty, increase access to education, improve the health, and foster political participation of all people in all parts and segments of our broad democracy. I know there are many folks on this conference that are not, that are calling from other parts of the world, of the Americas. We in Biden administration have taken on the challenge of ensuring the United States is a model again, a role model of how we can advance democracy and our economy through an integral process of ensuring that families, in particular women, have the basic protection and the basic economic security to be able to thrive. And by that, be able to allow for our communities to grow and thrive from the ground up. We believe through these different policies and the legislative priorities, we can serve as a model for the world, and again lead through our practice and through our day-to-day routine of governing. The Gender Policy Council is an integral part of that process. It's a new initiative. We are evolving, but we have taken the task seriously of ensuring through a whole of government effort that we are integrating gender equality and gender equity in all the work of the government, from these legislative priorities that obviously have emerged as a means of recovering or the means of ensuring the country's back on track. And you can see it in the priorities that have been articulated in the different legislative packages that really focus on women's empowerment and women being an essential and necessary factor in economic growth and basic economic recovery, but also in the day-to-day operation of the administration, from issues involving equal pay to the way we look at our foreign policy, to ensure that our values in the way we do business domestically also translates into the in the values that we promote in our foreign policy, and vice versa. So with that, I thank you, Claudia, for allowing me to be part of this discussion, and all the colleagues who are here present, who are obviously every day working to advance gender equality and women's rights. And I'm happy that you are convening and having this discussion. But I hope this overview, what we're doing from the White House, has been helpful.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Reynoso. On behalf of the participants and the panelists and the institutions that convened this conference, we're extremely grateful to you both for being here and also reminding us of the work that needs to be done, the work that is on its way, the important roles that women play in incredibly vulnerable employment sectors, namely the care sector. And for those of us making our way in the United States, it's honestly an enormous relief, actually, given the last few years, to hear that our administration is prioritizing this and intends to once again have the United States participate in a productive way in ensuring women's equality in the region and in the world. And who knows, maybe we might even make our way into some constitutional protections like an ERA. We'll keep our fingers crossed. So thank you so much. We're very, very grateful for your presence.
Thank you, Claudia. I should add that both the jobs plan and the families plan are in Congress, right? So we hope that folks can use their relationships and their voices to make sure that these issues are continuously at the forefront of our legislative activities, and that members of Congress, obviously do the right thing by pushing for these proposals to become the law, which is still pending, right? We were able to pass the American Rescue Plan, the ARP, but the legislative, the families plan and the jobs plan are still in the hands of Congress. So we really hope, to get full support and make those plans and what I propose and what I put forth reality for the American people.
Absolutely. And I think those of us here and those of us watching are certainly behind those efforts. And you may know we also have a petition before the Inter-American Commission on behalf of domestic workers in the United States too, in hopes that there will be some reform in that area. And we know Vice President Harris holds that dear to her heart as well. So this is all hopeful. Thank you very, very much. So I'm going to take this opportunity, now that we have heard that wonderful presentation from our keynote, to just inform you a bit about what the rest of the day holds. And then we're going to break for 15 minutes until our 10:30 panel. Were we all in person, and we wish that we were, we would be offering you coffee and cakes. So I hope that you will all take the opportunity to get yourself some coffee and cakes. So our 10:30 panel will be on gender and governance, parity and representation. And the ambassador has done a really wonderful job of teeing up that discussion on the importance of women's political leadership and political representation, and the unforeseen complications in really achieving that the answer is often not just quotas, even if you go that far, but that there are other challenges that make it difficult to really ensure that women's voices are represented in politics. And then at 12 o'clock, we have a panel that we're very excited about, which is Advocates for Responsive Change, Diversity, Inclusion, and Transformation. And the goal of that panel is to really ask the difficult question about whether or not efforts that advance women's equality and advance women's rights are really addressing the many identities that women hold at the intersection of identity, both our identities as to race, as to ethnicity, as to culture, and if there are prices that we are paying by not having the proper discussions that really encapsulate women's identities holistically. And then at 1:30, we will have another panel on sexual and reproductive rights and gender-based violence. These are two areas that consistently represent challenges, both in terms of ensuring that constitutions are responsive and implemented, but that are still enormous barriers for women in their full socioeconomic and political participation. And then we will close the day with a look forward, equal protection provisions, the promise, the reality, and the way forward. And that panel will be a discussion about what equality can actually look like. Not only the formal equality version that we have here in the United States, but the more robust equality, substantive equality that is reflected in our international treaties and in many constitutions outside of the US throughout Latin America, but how that equality can truly be transformative. And we have a really amazing panel of speakers there to take us through that discussion. Just the technical, so that you anticipate, essentially, right now, everyone will be pushed into a waiting room. And we will invite you back a few minutes before 10:30 so we can start that panel. So when you're pushed into a waiting room, that's supposed to happen. And then the conference will open back up in essentially 18, 19 minutes for those of you who are in a different time zone. I have also received repeated reminders, and I apologize to the translators. I am trying to speak more slowly. Everyone else, please speak slowly. I know it's difficult because we all have a lot to say, but this is a very difficult and resource-intensive activity that the translators are doing. So let's all remind ourselves to speak slowly. And with that, we will break for 18 or so minutes. We look forward to seeing you back here for our first topic-specific discussion.